We're going to look at cost behavior, and basically when we talk about the behavior is about how a person react or respond, right? So that's how we behave. So in what way that costs behave? Now, the way that costs behave is in terms of how the cost would react towards the changes in activity level. Okay, you can try to understand that the word activity levels are like production level. Okay, now so we are basically saying what will happen to the cost when you increase your production, and what will happen to the cost when you reduce the production. Now, the way that the cost will react to the change in the production level, that's what we mean by cost behavior. So generally, we would say that cost could behave in two ways. Now, we're going to start with the two-way first. One is we call it as a variable cost, and the other one is called a fixed cost. Now, the name itself is quite easy for us to understand. Now, why do you call a cost a variable cost? Because it varies. And why would you call a cost a fixed cost? Because it's fixed. So what do you mean by a variable cost and what do you mean by a fixed cost? Now, a variable cost is basically defined as those costs that will vary with the activity level. Okay? The costs that vary with the activity level. So when you say the costs vary with the activity level, that means when you increase your production, the cost goes up. When you reduce your production, the cost comes down. And when you don't produce, you don't have a cost. Okay, so can we use an example to show you like what is a variable cost? Okay, I'm going to use Excel to show you what does it mean as a variable cost. Now let's say I know that the cost per unit is $5. Okay, now what will happen to the total cost when your production quantity is, let's say, 1 unit or 2 units, now, or 5 units or 10 units? Okay, now I guess you will know the simple math, right? If 1 unit is going to cost you $5, then 2 units is going to be 10, 5 units is going to be 25, right? So indirectly, we are taking what is the cost per unit and then multiply by the number of units. Okay, so we are using the cost per unit multiplied by the number of units. Now that's how we will derive what we call the total variable cost. You agree? So if I'm talking about 2 units times 5. Now I'm just going to use the same formula, but I want to freeze the cell with the value. So you know Excel we can autofill, right? So you see, if I'm going to autofill, wait, did I just made a mistake? Oh, sorry, I freeze the wrong one. Okay, I should freeze the C11 and not the B16. My bad. Okay, now let's autofill this. Now you see it's going to be $10, 25, and 50. How do I get 50? Well, it's basically cost for a unit, which is 5, and I'm talking about 10 units. So what will happen if I don't make any units at all? Now, if I don't make any units, the cost is going to be 0, right? Now, that's exactly what variable cost is. So if we would present this on a graph, the graph would looks like how? How would the graph looks like? It's going to be, if you don't make anything at all, it's going to start from 0. Okay, you don't make anything at all, you're going to get 0. Now, and when you make 1 unit, it's going to cost you $5. If you make second unit, it's going to cost you $10. And you will see that this is how the point is going to be. Okay, so let's say if you don't make anything, it's going to be like that. If you make 1 unit, it's going to cost you $5. You make 2 unit, it's going to cost you $10. If you make 3 unit, it's going to cost you $15. Now that's the best I can do. Okay, So you would see that this is how the line is going to be. So it's just a straight line, okay? Starts from point 0 and it goes all the way up. Now that's how it's going to be, okay? Now because we're just basically drawing the graph according to the value that we have. Now you know that your Excel can actually draw a graph, right? So I'm just going to use this to show you. I'm going to highlight this part. I'm going to insert. I can recommend a chart. We could use this scatter diagram, and that's it. Here you go. Now notice if you join the line, this is exactly what you're going to get. It's a straight line, okay? Now that is how it looks like if let's say you're talking about a variable cost. Now, so what is the formula to get the total variable cost? That we say it's the cost per unit, and then you multiply by the number of units. So mathematically, we usually will label this equation as y equals to bx. Now what is y? Y is the value, which is the cost, and x is actually the quantity. So you know that as you label your graph, right? This is your y-axis and this is your x-axis. So your y-axis shows the value, the x-axis shows the quantity. So the total variable cost is based on what? Is the cost per unit, which is b, and x is the number of units. So you will get a graph which looks like this, okay? Now let's move on to the next one, yeah? Now, what if I ask you to draw me the variable cost per unit graph, okay? Now, so you see, let's just use back the same thing on my Excel, huh? Now, my cost per unit multiplied by the number of units will give me the total variable cost, okay? So if I have 0 unit, if I have 3 unit, if I have 10 unit, if I have 15 unit, so if I say I made a mistake. If my cost per unit is 5, if I have 0 unit, if I have 5 unit, 8 units, 11 unit, now this is my total variable cost, which is by taking 5, so clumsy, 5 multiplied by the quantity. So you know, if you don't make, you got no cost. If you make 5 units, it's going to be 25. If you make 8, it's going to be 40 and 55, and there you go, okay? Now, so we are asking if you're going to plot the variable cost per unit, okay? The variable cost per unit. Now, that means I'm asking for this. And you realize that actually your variable cost per unit is not changing. No matter how many units that you're making, your variable cost per unit is the same. It's 5. So if that's the case, if I ask you, can you show me a graph depicts the variable cost per unit, how would you draw this, guys? It's all 5. That means it's not changing. No matter you're making 0 unit or 5 unit or 8 unit or 11 unit, the cost per unit is 5. So which means you're going to expect that this is going to be how the line looks like, right? It's like that. Because we know that your cost per unit is 5. Whether you are having 0 unit, the cost per unit is 5. You're having 3 unit, the cost per unit is still 5. If you're having 10 unit, the cost per unit is still 5. So you get what I mean, right? So the cost per unit is always 5. So that's why the graph is a flat line. Now, so if I'm asking you for the total variable cost, okay, if I'm asking for a total variable cost, that's how it looks like. If I'm asking for the variable cost per unit, that's how it looks like, okay? So I hope you're clear about that, huh? Okay, now let's look at fixed costs. Now, what exactly is a fixed cost? Now, let's go back to the definition in my notes. I guess you can already know what's a fixed cost, even without looking at the definition. A cost is fixed. A cost is fixed is a cost that will not change even when the quantity changes. Now, let's read this. I know some of you will say fixed cost is a cost that's fixed. Now, I will say that examiner will not accept that answer, because you're not explaining something by just telling me a fixed cost is fixed. Okay, so in what way that it is fixed? It is fixed because the cost is not going to change even when your activity changes. Now, fixed cost refers to cost that is not changing even when the activity level changes. So if you read the definition I give in the notes, are those that we say that the costs that remain constant. Constant means it's not changing regardless of the change in the activity level. That means whether you make more, you make less, the cost is the same. Now, if you say your cost is going to be same, now for example, if I'm just going to ask you, can you think of the fixed cost in a business? So let's say if you're going to operate a restaurant. Okay, restaurant is not a nice word for people nowadays. Let's say you're going to run a cafe. Now, can you tell me what are example of the costs that you will pay? Okay, let's say you're going to pay even if you don't open your cafe throughout the whole month. That means you don't sell anything, but you still have to pay the same amount of it, money. Okay, now I'm sure first of all, I guess you will think of rental, right? Exactly, rental is normally a fixed cost. Now some of you might say, oh, my cafe will need to have staff salary. Exactly. Okay, you're gonna have a fixed cost. Okay, a staff salary. So let's say you may have a staff salaries because of they are permanent fixed pay staff. Okay, so their pay is fixed by the time. All right, so every month that they work, they are paid the same amount, so it's a fixed cost. Now, so take one of these. For example, in a cafe or in a factory, you realize that when your production quantity, your costs, okay, now if I don't do any business at all, zero, okay, my cost is, let's say my rental, let's say is 8,000. Now whether I operate, I don't operate, my cost is 8,000. So let's say if I'm going to make if I'm going to open my cafe and I start selling food, spaghetti or whatever, okay, so if I have 200 units of sales, will your rental cost be the same or not the same? I guess you're going to say, yeah, it's going to be the same. So even if you manage to have 1,000, you say, yeah, it will still be the same. So fixed costs will be the same regardless of the quantity. So fixed costs will always be the same regardless of quantity. So the fixed cost that you're paying is always the same amount. So we always say that the equation for fixed cost is y equals to a. A is the amount. So if a is 8,000, then y is 8,000. So the fixed cost line will just be a straight line like that. That's how a fixed cost will look like. Okay, now so I would like you to think about this. Okay, I would like you to think about this. Now imagine if you have a factory. Okay, if you have a factory, that your rental per month, okay, your rental per month is $10,000. Okay, your rental per month is $10,000. Okay, let's use a little bit of business mindset that we are having. Okay, now think about this. How would you make the cost of operating your factory be as low as possible? Okay, how would you want to make the cost of operating a factory be as low as possible? Now imagine if you will have a production quantity of 5,000 units in each month. Okay, now tell me, how much will the $10,000 be spread out or shared out among the 5,000? What would you do mathematically? Now you will say basically the cost per unit that you shed out among all the production will be the rental that you're going to pay divided by the production quantity. Sorry, I'm just going to remove the money sign because the Excel is having a problem. Okay, so you're just going to use the value, okay, the value, and then divide by the number of units. Okay, now so you know that by making 5,000 units, the share of the rental is about $2. So tell me, what would you do to reduce the cost of your product? Now you probably will say, I'm going to make more. Am I right? Now imagine if you're going to increase the production from 5,000 to 10,000. Now what will it be? You will take the same cost, divide by the unit, and it drops to $1. Now can you imagine if I would increase it to 12,000 unit, 15,000 unit, 20,000 unit, 25,000 unit. Now the moment when I keep on producing more and more and more, what will happen? Now you realize that the cost will go down, right? Okay, now so I'm going to freeze the value, and I will just drag so that you will autofill. Now you notice by making 5,000 units, the share of the cost is actually $2. But by making 25,000 units, the share of the cost is only 40 cents. You see, all this is actually very important when it comes to cost management or even pricing. Right, so I'm going to show you something on the screen. That this is something that it's actually the real thing that we're having from this is one of my actual supplier that supplies me all the prints. Okay, now let's say we're looking at business card. You know, we need to give name cards, right? So you can have name cards, business card. Okay, whichever one that you're looking at, it does not really matter. Okay, let's say UV coating business card. Now you notice that the price of the card, okay, the price of the card, let's see if the pricing, okay, now the pricing is here. Okay, the pricing is here. Now if I would order just one box of the card, the price is 18.5. Okay, but what will happen if I order 2 boxes of the card? Now it's 22.6. Think about that. Why that when it's only one card it's 18.5, but when I order 2 boxes, isn't it supposed to be 37? No, it only goes up a little bit to 22.6. And what if I order 3 boxes of the card? It went to 25. Now you notice that the more I order, it gets cheaper because the increase in the cost of the card is not the same by the number of boxes. Why would it be so? Now, because it's the same concept. Every time when you print something, the factory will have to set up the machines. There will be fixed costs. But because you increase the volume that you order, then what you're able to do is you're able to share out the cost of the fixed cost. You share out the fixed costs amongst the quantity that you make. So this is exactly the effects that we're having. That the more we make, the cheaper it becomes. Okay, but it will never become zero, because even though the cost gets smaller and smaller, it will just get much smaller, but it won't be zero, because you can't make more until you don't have a cost, right? So you get what I mean? So it will not be possible for that way. So if I'm going to make 100,000, you know, it's like I'm increasing from 5,000 to 100,000. It's a lot more, but you see my cost is still there, so it's going to be 0.01. So how would this fixed cost per unit looks like? Why not we use Excel and give us a recommended chart? Yep, so I got that scatter diagram, and that's exactly how it looks like. You see, the quantity will have a steep drop, okay? It has a steep drop at the very beginning because you're sharing out the cost, but the sharing will get lesser and lesser as the quantity gets bigger and bigger. So it always looks like that. That's how it looks like. Can you follow? So if you're going to draw this, you will draw it in the same manner. So you just come here all the way down and it will look like that, but it will never become zero, because you can't come to a point that it's going to be zero unless your quantity is so big that the cost becomes negligible, okay? But that is really not logical in life, because your overheads has a capacity, so you cannot make unlimited quantity. So in that case, this is how the line is going to look like. So are you clear about how would a fixed cost per unit looks like? Now that is the basic cost behavior, the variable cost and the fixed cost, okay? Now I'm going to go on to ask you to think about something else. I'm going to delete this now, okay? Okay, let's take away all this information and let us talk about the cafe again. Now let me ask you, if let's say you're going to close for the entire month, okay? Now my question is, do you think you have electricity bill to pay? Okay, that if you're closed the entire month, do you think you have electricity bill to pay? Now I really not sure that, because I guess different countries, they have different ways of charging their electricity bill. Like in Malaysia, my country that I'm from, the electricity bill has a minimum. That means even if you don't use any electricity, the power company will still charge us a minimum amount. So we're going to say, like, if you close for the entire month, they will still charge us a minimum amount, let's say $50. But let's say if you're going to operate for 5 days in a month, and if you operate for 15 days in a month, what will happen to the electricity bill? Now you know that it's going to be $50 plus something, correct? Now example, okay? Or you're going to see that the amount is going to be higher and higher, all right? So there will be some charges depending on how the power company is going to charge you, okay? Now I will come to that later, but what I'm trying to relate to you is, the moment you start to operate, you're going to start using more and more electricity, right? So there might come to a point that you will start to see your electricity bill start to go up. Okay, you start to go up. Okay, now when you start to go up, then you will see that your bill will goes up according to the increase in the production capacity. So now I would like to give you, let's say, two schemes. Okay, two schemes. Now the first scheme is like this. The power company said that there will always be a base charge of $50 per month, okay? All right, and then they say whatever, let's say, kilowatt hour that you're using, they will actually take, let's say, 80 cents per kilowatt hour. All right, so that's what they're saying. Whatever you're using will take 80 cents per kilowatt hour. Now I'm going to come up with another scheme for you to see, okay? Now the second scheme is like this. They say that whatever usage that you have, okay, it will be based on 80 cents per kilowatt hour. However, the minimum charge is, let's say, $70 per month. Okay, now I would like you to use these two examples. You're going to pause the video for a while. You're going to use these two examples and think about, number one, what happened if my usage in terms of my kilowatt hours is going to be 0, if it's going to be 100, and then 500. Okay, so what will happen if let's say my kilowatt hours is going to be 0, 100 and 500. Now on the same side, I'm going to do the same thing over here. It's going to be 0, 100 and 500. Okay, maybe I will add one more, let's say 60. Okay, now please calculate for me how much will the cost be. Okay, how much will the cost be in this case? Okay, so we're gonna have one and we're gonna have another example. So why not you pause the video, you work it out, and then we carry on the discussion. Okay, so let's see how we're gonna calculate the amount. Now you see, if your base charge is gonna be $50, right? So whether you're using or not, you're gonna start with 50. So even with 0, it's gonna be 50. Now what will happen if let's say your usage is 60 kilowatt hour? So how much will it be? Now what's the answer that you're having? Do you get 98? Okay, how do we actually get the answer? Now one way that we could do is we take the total variable cost and we plus with the fixed cost. It gives us the total cost. Now the fixed cost will always be 50, right? And then the variable cost, remember the formula for variable cost is bx. That means take the price times the quantity, which in this case is 0. So in this case is 0.8, and then you multiply by 60, so you're gonna get 48, correct or not? Now here you're gonna get 0.8 and you multiply by 100, then you're gonna get 80. So 80 plus 50 is gonna give me 130. And then here you're talking about 0.8 times 500, which gives us 400 times plus 50. You're gonna get 450. So we are able to draw a line that shows the cost will start from here, suggesting that even when you have 0 quantity, the cost is going to be 50. But every time when you goes up by 1 unit or 1 kilowatt hour, you will have to increase the cost by 80 cents. So that means you will expect that the line will move in this way. Now do you notice that this graph, if I would label it in this manner, this is the section that represents the fixed cost, and this triangle is the portion that represents the variable cost. Okay, now so that's basically how a mixed cost looks like. So if I would put this on an equation and ask you, let's say if I'm asking you, can you calculate for me how much will the cost be if let's say I'm looking at this quantity? What will the cost be? Now how do we actually get the answer? So we're going to use the same formula that we've just got here. We say that the cost that you're going to get is bx plus what's the formula for fixed cost? Is A. Okay, so most of the time you see people will write it as A plus bx, whereas in your school's days, I think you learn straight line equation as y equals to mx plus c. It's actually the same thing. Okay, now this is the typical straight line equation that we use to represent mixed costs. All right, now but you see, not all the mixed costs will look like that. Okay, not all the mixed costs will look like that. So I gave you another example of mixed cost scenario that I say that, okay, let's say that every kilo hour we will charge 80 cents, but we will have a minimum of $70. So you're gonna see, we're gonna start with the minimum, okay, and then we're gonna calculate by taking bx. So we will say, okay, If I take 0.8 times 0, I'm going to get 0. Minimum is 70, so the cost is going to be 70. Okay, now if let's say I'm talking about 60 kilo hour, you're going to get 0.8 times 60, which is 48. The minimum is 70, so it's going to be 70 as well. But when you are at 100 kilowatt hour, you will actually be having 80, and the minimum is 70, so obviously you will start to take 80. And if you're talking about 500 kilowatt hour, it's going to be 400. The minimum is 70, so obviously we will charge you at 400. Now if you would use this and imagine how would the graph looks like, how would it be? Now I guess we can put it in this manner. Your cost is actually minimum 70. When you have no unit, you still have to pay 70. But you know, up to certain point, you will still be paying 70. Okay, up to certain point, you still be paying 70. But once you hit above that, you realize that the variable rate will actually be higher. So for every increase in the volume, the cost goes up. So you will start to see that it goes in this manner. So that is just a different variation of mixed cost. So you realize that I'm giving you different ways in businesses where the mixed cost element could comes in. Okay, I thought that this is just something, you know, it's really like not so much for study, but it's more for your knowledge. Now, would you be able to think of a mixed cost line that is like this? Okay, and then it's like this. Okay, a mixed cost line that's like this, and then it goes flat. So which means you don't pay if you don't use or you don't produce. And as you produce more, you use more, you're going to see the cost goes up, goes up, goes up. But come to a point, it's going to be all flat. You might just want to pause the video and think that what kind of example that a cost would be like that. Okay, I'm not sure whether you got it, but I'm just going to reveal it to you. If you still try to think, you can just pause the video. One good example is those expenses that it comes with a cap, a max cap. Now, for example, one of the easy one that I think a lot of us could relate is like parking rates. You know, there are places where they charge parking by the hour. So for example, they say that the parking costs $10 per hour, okay, but then they will cap at maximum $100 per day, for example. So which means if you don't park your car, you don't pay the parking. You park for 1 hour, you pay $10. You park for 5 hours, you pay $50. You park for 10 hours, you pay $100. You park for 11 hours, you will still pay $100, because it's basically flat by capping at 100. Okay, right, so these are the way of how we represent different types of cost behavior. So guys, just a quick recap again. So we said a variable cost is defined by taking y equals to bx. Y is the total cost. In this case, the total cost is made up of your variable cost per unit, and x is actually the quantity. Okay, now, and if you have a fixed cost, you will say total cost is basically a fixed amount, which is a. So if you have a mixed cost, you will have y equals to a plus bx, which is basically a mixed cost is comprised of the fixed cost plus the variable cost element. All right, okay, so that's all that we will do for now for this session, and then we will continue to the next session to talk about how do we split mixed costs into variable costs and fixed costs again. Now that's a very important thing, especially when you need to do budgeting when you come to the higher level. Thank you guys, bye. Get more resources on our lectures and our sharing and all the resources that we have here, you may want to come to our portal and sign up as a user. If you have more information, come to our website and drop in questions using our chat box. Thank you very much for your visit. Bye.